a 911 call, a black teenager, and a mother who arrived just in time. But what happens when the truth proves far more powerful than the accusation? The evening sun cast a golden hue over Brookstone Estates, an upscale neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where lawns were meticulously trimmed, driveways gleamed with fresh sealant, and sidewalks were nearly flawless. The atmosphere was still, almost unnaturally so, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the soft hum of a luxury car passing by. 16-year-old Elijah Brooks adjusted the strap of his gym bag as he walked, his headphones blasting music that drowned out the world around him. After an intense basketball practice at Franklin High, he was exhausted from a long day of classes and drills. Normally he'd take the bus home, but today he chose to cut through Brookstone. It wasn't unfamiliar territory. His best friend lived just a few blocks away. But he also understood that people in this neighborhood didn't expect to see someone like him walking alone. Inside one of those pristine homes, behind a large bay window, Linda Cartwright watched. Having lived in Brookstone Estates for 15 years, Linda knew every face, every car, and every routine on her street. But right now, something felt off. A teenage boy, black, tall, athletic building, walking alone with a bag slung over his shoulder. A flicker of concern stirred in her. Or was it something else? Her hand hovered over her phone as she hesitated. Maybe he was just passing through. Maybe he had a legitimate reason to be here. But doubt crept in, relentless and insistent. What if he was up to something? What if she ignored this and later saw a news report about a break-in just down the street? A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Better safe than sorry, right? Linda took a deep breath and dialed 911. Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. But Linda had no idea that Elijah was far from just another teenager, and she certainly didn't know who his mother was. As she spoke to the dispatcher, her grip on the phone tightened. Her eyes remained fixed on Elijah. He's walking down my street, looking around like he's checking out the houses. I don't know who he is, and he's carrying a bag. The dispatcher's voice remained composed. Can you describe him? Linda pressed her lips together. He's tall, black, wearing a hoodie and gym shorts. He has a bag, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem right. Is he doing anything illegal? The dispatcher asked. Linda hesitated. Well, no, not exactly. But I've never seen him before. This is a quiet neighborhood. That was enough. The dispatcher assured her that officers would be sent to check it out. Linda hung up, still watching as Elijah briefly stopped to switch his playlist. He had no idea what was coming. A few streets away, Officers Bennett and Rodriguez were patrolling in their squad car when the call came through. Possible prowler, Brookstone Estates, male black, mid-teens carrying a bag. Bennett, a stocky officer with 15 years on the force, exchanged a glance with Rodriguez, his younger partner who was still learning the ropes. Let's check it out. With that, they flipped on their lights and sped toward the neighborhood. Elijah was just 2 blocks from home when he heard it, the sharp wail of a police siren. He turned, confused, just as the squad car pulled up beside him. The doors swung open. Hey, stop right there! Elijah froze, pulling out his headphones. 2 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. What's in the bag? Bennett demanded. Elijah blinked. My basketball gear. Where are you headed? Home. His voice was steady, but his chest tightened. He knew this wasn't just a routine stop. Rodriguez stepped closer. You live here? Yes, sir. A few blocks over. Bennett scoffed. That right? What's the address? Elijah started to answer, but before he could, Rodriguez grabbed his bag. Hey, that's my stuff. Relax, Bennett muttered, unzipping the bag and rummaging through it. Shoes, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle. Nothing suspicious. But Bennett wasn't satisfied. Why'd you cut through this neighborhood? Elijah's pulse pounded. It's just a shortcut. I'm not doing anything wrong. Rodriguez hesitated. Maybe he's telling the truth. Bennett remained unmoved. Then why'd someone call the cops on him? Elijah opened his mouth, but his words caught in his throat as he saw something behind the officers, a sleek black SUV rolling toward them. It pulled up and stopped abruptly. The doors swung open. Out stepped Denise Brooks, the mayor of Columbus. But neither the officers nor Linda had any idea who they had just stopped. The air shifted the moment Denise Brooks stepped out of the SUV. She wasn't just any mother. She was the mayor of Columbus, and she carried herself accordingly. Clad in a sharp navy blazer and heels that echoed against the pavement, she moved with deliberate confidence. She wasn't rushing, nor was she flustered. She was composed. A woman accustomed to entering rooms where her authority was questioned and making it abundantly clear who she was. Her gaze locked onto the two officers standing over her son. Bennett's posture stiffened as she approached. He had seen her before, on the news, at city meetings, but it took a moment for him to fully process the situation. Rodriguez spoke first. Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling a situation. Denise didn't even blink. Oh, I can see that, she replied, her voice smooth but sharp enough to cut through steel. And exactly what situation would that be? Elijah exhaled, relief washing over him. Mom, she lifted a hand, silent, firm. I've got this. Bennett cleared his throat. We received a call about a suspicious person in the area. Denise arched an eyebrow. Suspicious? Rodriguez gestured toward Elijah. We stopped him to ask some questions. We need to confirm if he actually lives here. Denise inhaled slowly, deliberately. Then, without a word, she pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. That's my son. On the screen was Elijah's student ID, their home address, and a photo of the two of them at a community event just last month. Silence. Rodriguez shifted uneasily. Bennett's jaw tightened. Denise wasn't finished. So tell me, did you stop him because he was actually suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong? Neither officer responded. Behind them, Linda stood frozen in her doorway, watching it all unfold. She had recognized Denise the moment she stepped out of the SUV, and as the realization set in, her stomach dropped. She had called the police on the mayor's son. She had called the police on a kid who was simply walking home. And now, she stood there, watching as a mother, one of the most powerful women in the city, stared down two officers who suddenly had nothing to say. But just because they had gone quiet didn't mean Denise was done. She took a slow step forward, eyes fixed on them. The air felt heavier, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting to see what she would do next. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was calm, precise, cutting. You searched his bag. You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong. Bennett squared his shoulders. We were just following procedure. Denise tilted her head slightly. Procedure? Rodriguez shifted again. We got a call about a suspicious person. Denise took another step. A teenage boy, walking home. Neither officer had an answer. Elijah rubbed his hands together, the sting of being treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood still lingering. Finally, Denise turned her attention to Linda, who stood motionless in her doorway. Was it you? Denise asked. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She hadn't meant for this to happen. She never imagined it would go this far. She wasn't racist, she told herself. She was just being cautious. But now, she found herself face to face with a mother, one who had to leave her job, rush into her own neighborhood, and defend her son from suspicion over nothing. Linda's face flushed red. She swallowed hard. "I just thought—" Denise cut her off. "You thought what?" Linda had no response that wouldn't make her sound exactly like the person she never wanted to believe she was. Denise's gaze remained steady. "Do you realize what could have happened here?" Linda lowered her eyes. Elijah could have been tackled, arrested, slammed against a squad car for resisting, or worse. And all because a woman who had lived in the same house for 15 years decided that the sight of a black teenager with a gym bag was enough reason to dial 911. Denise didn't need to say it. Linda already knew. The officers knew too. But instead of apologizing, Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way." Denise exhaled sharply. "That's it?" Rodriguez hesitated. "Look, we were just responding to a call." Denise shook her head, disappointment settling in. "Yeah, you were." She turned back to Elijah, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Come on, baby. Let's go home." Elijah slung his bag over his shoulder and followed his mother to the SUV. The officers walked back to their squad car, muttering under their breath. And Linda, she just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching them drive away. But for Elijah, for Denise, for every black family that has had to justify their presence in spaces where they have every right to be, this wasn't over. The ride home was silent. Elijah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, replaying everything in his head, the flashing lights, the way they rummaged through his bag as if he were a criminal, the way the officers looked through him rather than at him. Denise gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She had always known this moment would come. She just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. After a few minutes, she finally spoke. "You okay?" Elijah let out a slow breath. "I don't know." She nodded. "I get it." He turned to her. "What would have happened if you weren't there?" Denise's stomach clenched. There was no answer she could give him that wouldn't terrify them both. Instead, she reached over, squeezing his hand. "You did everything right." Elijah sighed, and it still didn't matter. Denise looked at him, really looked at him. A 16-year-old kid, still sweaty from basketball practice, still carrying the weight of a moment that never should have happened. She knew this wasn't just about today. It was about every story like this, every kid like him, every parent like her who had to teach their children how to navigate a world that saw them as a threat first, a person second. Across the neighborhood, Linda sat in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands. The same phone she had used to call 911. The same phone that could have been the reason Elijah never made it home. Her stomach twisted. She thought she was being cautious. She thought she was protecting her neighborhood. But now, she realized, she had just been afraid. And for the first time, she had to ask herself, afraid of what? She looked down at her phone screen. And then, for the first time, she confronted the question she had spent her entire life avoiding. What if the danger wasn't him? What if it was me? Now ask yourself, how many times has a call like this ended differently? How many stories like Elijah's don't end with a parent arriving just in time? And how many times do people like Linda get to walk away, never giving it another thought? This isn't just a story about one afternoon in one neighborhood. It's a reality that unfolds every single day. Maybe it's time we stop pretending not to see it. Maybe it's time we do something about it. If this story made you think, even for a second, share it. Talk about it. Learn from it. Because next time, when someone like Linda picks up the phone, the person on the other end might not be as lucky as Elijah.